It's the 6th anniversary of the Scottish referendum. I remember it well. So let's look at these momentous events through the eyes of an artist, Gerard M Burns. Join us on the Alex Salmond Show for Scotland and the art of politics, on air and online.
Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, where our eyes turn north to Scotland on the eve of the 6th anniversary of the country's independence referendum. In 2014, Scotland voted narrowly against independence, but latest polls show that majority opinion has now swung in favour. Today, rather than just look at the politics of another referendum, yes, says the Scottish Parliament, no, says the Prime Minister, we focus on the cultural underpinning of the Scottish political renaissance, and this through the work of one of Scotland's most famous artists. The career of Gerard M Burns has charted the last 30 years and more of Scottish life, and in particular, his portraiture has captured some of the most influential players on the sporting, political and cultural stage, from Karen Dunbar to Alan Cumming to Neil Lennon, to Judy Murray to Margot MacDonald to Brian Cox and Billy Connolly. In Referendum Scotland, these worlds more than often collide. But first to Alex, with your tweets, messages and emails.
Now, there was a big response to last week's show with Emma Kenny, who's probably Britain's best-known psychologist because of her TV work. Andrew Norfolk says, absolutely superb and gripping conversation with a psychologist. And one of Emma's most attractive features is she is open in debates with her viewers. So after Emma replied, Andrew says, you're more than welcome. It was a very different and refreshing perspective, therapeutic in that it was so grounded, rational and sensible in the middle of all of this anxiety and trauma. So high praise indeed from Andrew. Nico says, for some they feel trapped, for others they feel liberated. It's hard to quantify the outcome overall, but there's a long road ahead. Nicola Watts says, it's not just a mental health crisis. Anything that isn't COVID is being ignored and treatment delayed, despite hospitals being empty. Grant Stanfast says, mental health is very important, and it's people who think otherwise who are part of the problem. Dema McDuff disagrees. She says, ridiculous interview. I'm sorry, Dema. She says over 50% of the population have some health issues, and how many without any pre-existing conditions ended up dead or in really life-changing situations. Scott Hutton says, it does affect the brain. Sense of taste is a neural function, and people are being repelled from smells and tastes they used to love. And finally, Caitlin says, there was already a mental health crisis before COVID. There's not enough money getting put into it, and no one is receiving adequate treatment. So some really interesting views there. And next week, we have some of the country's leading experts on COVID. And we're giving you the chance to ask them any question you like about what might be causing you concern about the pandemic. Please post your questions as a video or a text on our social media. The links are below. But now back to Taz and to Scotland.
There's a famous scene in the Orson Welles classic film The Third Man, where his character reflects that Italy under the turmoil of the bourgeois in 30 years produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci and the Renaissance, while 500 years of brotherly love in Switzerland produced the cuckoo clock. Now, Scotland hasn't been run by the bourgeois, but has been moving through a period of fundamental cultural and political transformation. And the key point is that these are exactly the times of change where art and artists often flourish. Alex is in conversation with the wonderful Gerard Burns.
Gerard, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Great to speak to you. Great to speak to you.
Now, I'm looking at your house there. You seem to have a pretty fair artistic setup. Would you use your home as your main studio? How does that work?
The house was quite a big decision. We moved to this amazing house 13 years ago as part of a plan, basically, to try to get me effectively out of the gallery system. We decided we were going to try and maybe do it differently. And in order to do that, I had to find a space. So I've got a huge studio up at the back of the garden. And what we do is we use this house twice a year. We have a formal exhibition here where it's invitation only, where basically people who have an interest in my work are able to come and see the paintings. And the beauty of it, as I've discovered, is that they're seeing the work within the context of a home rather than in a gallery space, which I always felt was a bit awkward. People can come normally, not during lockdown, obviously, but on an ongoing basis. And there's a good selection of everything I do, all of the various different facets of my work. There's good examples of just about everything I do on display really all the time.
I know you're in quarantine this now because your family are just back from Spain. I'm wondering, if we discount the global tragedy for a second, but is lockdown for your sort of artistic endeavour, is there a benefit in being able to get peace and quiet to get on with your painting, or are you, like so many professions, finding the whole thing a bit difficult and challenging?
So you would imagine that lockdown would have been a dream come true, but the truth of it for me was I really struggled. So absent all of that other input, all of that other stimulation, I found the get up in the morning, go to the studio. I found it hard, and actually, like probably many people, it forced me in the way, and I had to ask some really quite hard questions. What am I? If this isn't a dream come true, who am I as an artist? So it was an odd experience. As a consequence, what I was able to do was to really use the time, as you'd said, to dig deep. And what I did was I pushed into an area I've been trying to get at for quite some time. And I've been working with sculpture. I've been working in 3 dimensions. And I've made a couple of what I think are really quite strong pieces. So that's been the story of lockdown for me. The painting, I can't do it every day. I can't do it all day, every day. I can't. It exhausts me. So having that extra facet, that extra thing that I could go to, that was the thing that balanced the equation for me.
Let's talk about how Gerard M Burns started as a painter. I mean, for Scots of my generation, and I don't think I was particularly unlucky, I never felt that subjects like art or music, for that matter, got any sense of priority at school. Maybe I was just unlucky, but I don't think so. Was that your experience? And you've been a teacher yourself, of course. Have things changed now? Has there been a kind of revolution to put these subjects further forward in the curriculum? Well, what's your thinking on that?
I think it's a difficult one when it comes to teaching art, because you've got to ask the question, what is it you're teaching? And I suppose I could answer that by telling you a story of, I was the head of art at St Aloysius College in Glasgow, a private school, very academic. And I argued the case successfully that art and music were an essential part, an absolutely essential part of any person, any young person's school experience. The college went with that, and they committed some time, some money, and allowed me to build a department. So we created a bit of a revolution in St Aloysius. We taught hand skills. We taught it, hold the pencil this way, hold the brush that way, mix the paint that way, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. And it was astonishing. There's a generation of kids, it took a few years for me to kind of work out what we were doing, but there are a generation of kids, and possibly a few of them will be watching this and they'll be nodding furiously. They could all draw. Every single one of them. This whole nonsense of, well, she's good at art and he isn't. We took that apart completely. With the right training, everybody can obtain the hand skills. Now, that isn't the same at the end of the day as being an artist. You need that extra element, and how do you build creativity? That's another question completely. But my argument always was, unless you've got the hand skills, unless you have some means to express yourself, the creative bit is locked away.
Now, obviously, Scotland has produced great artists, great musicians, but it wouldn't have been the obvious career choice for a working class lad in central Scotland in the 70s and 80s. I mean, what was the reaction from your dad and the Burns household when you came home and said, look, this engineering stuff's not working out, I'm off to Glasgow College of Art? I mean, was it wet?
It was a disaster. I was a disaster. I would have been the worst engineer in the world. I couldn't get it. For the first time in my life, I understood that there are different brains. And I was in a room full of people who were all kind of nodding, and lots of the stuff I just couldn't get it. So actually, I applied without telling my parents, first of all, to the planning, architects and planning up at Glasgow School of Art, and got accepted. And went back and said to my dad, and I think it's still, if I speak to him about it, it's one of the biggest hurts of his life, that I'd done this without really speaking to him. And he actually said at that point, no, I actually had an acceptance to go and do town and country planning. He said, this is about going to art school. Why don't you go to art school? And it was like a bomb going off in my head. I thought, well, okay then. So raced to get a portfolio together and was accepted. But by the time I was almost through art school, I was thoroughly disillusioned actually by the whole thing. So I wanted to be a pop star. I decided that actually the art had been smashing and I enjoyed it, but the route for me was music. And that's what I did when I came out of art school. We had a record deal and I tried really hard at that for a while.
And the name of your band?
Oh goodness, here we go. A band called Valerie and the Week of Wonders. The greatest band never to come out of Glasgow. An amazing band, actually.
And just your style, Gerard, was what exactly? So
it would be kind of quite grungy, and quite post-punk, very guitar-based, and verging ultimately towards the end of the time, almost towards a kind of Americana. But as I say, a good outfit. We signed to A&M Records and just didn't get the breaks, basically. We never even got to the point where we made the first album, which was a shame. It was a shame.
Your new book, which I've seen, which you kindly sent me a copy of, Gerard M Burns, The Ultimate Table Topper. I mean, I'll tell you, there'll be people doing interviews, distance interviews, all over the world who want that on their camera shot. Tell us about the book, Gerard.
So the book, this is something I've been trying to put together for many years. It's a bizarre exercise to write a book about yourself. It's semi-autobiographical. A lot of the information came from me and basically was reshaped by a wonderful writer, a girl called Jane Wright. But it's a bizarre old exercise. You've got to almost think about yourself in the third person, almost as if you're dead, you know. This guy, what did he do? And then what did he do? And then what happened? But it's at the point where in terms of my work and in terms of my career, there should be a book about my work. And actually, this is something that probably should have happened many years ago. Anyway, the stars came into alignment just over a year ago, an introduction to a company called Bell & Bain in Glasgow. Amazing people, and basically almost on the spot they said, we'll do it for you. And in fact, what they said was, we'll do it for nothing. They viewed it as quite a high prestige project for them. So as you say, we've produced this absolutely beautiful book, highest quality, the paper quality, everything about it. So it's a statement. It's a statement about, in my 59th year, this is where I am as an artist. And interestingly, actually, even since the book was published, I've mentioned to you the sculptures. There is a next chapter. So that's the way I feel about it. It's a kind of line in the sand. That's where I was at that point, and we'll see what happens next.
Now, when Gerard M Burns said he was thinking about himself as if he was dead, I should say that means as if he was dead for our viewers around the world, but he's no deed or dead. He's very much alive. And when you join us after the break, we're going to go through some of the themes that have marked the work of one of Scotland's most famous artists.
Welcome back. In this special programme marking the 6th anniversary of the Scottish independence referendum, Alex is in conversation with top Scottish artist Gerard Burns.
Gerard, you know, after you spelled teaching and you got into being, not easily, because these things aren't easy, but into being a very notable and successful artist. Now, some of your early paintings had religious themes. Some had themes around the Saltire, the national flag of Scotland. What was your inspiration, and what were the ones that, you know, made your name as an artist?
The Saltire is a theme which is in my work, well and truly in my work. But I remember the very first one that I made, and I've been asked about it a lot, a painting called The Rowan, which you'll know well, Alex.
I should explain to the viewers, the Rowan was a painting that ended up in my office when I was First Minister of Scotland, because I happened to see it at Ayr Racecourse, but there's a really interesting story behind that painting. On you go, tell it, Gerard.
When asked, you know, why the Saltire, when I made that painting, I would probably have described myself as being apolitical. It wasn't intended to be a political statement. Basically, I love the Saltire because I'm Scottish. And as an artist, you're looking all the time for things that pop out at you. You're looking for that thing that catches your eye again and again. And everywhere I went in the world, whenever I saw photographs, the Saltire just jumped out at me. So for me, it was almost a case of, I can't believe people aren't doing something with this. So I decided that I would make this big painting where the Saltire itself fills almost 80% of the canvas. The crow in contemporary culture has quite a gothic connotation, quite a dark connotation, but in Pictish culture, because of the sound that the crow makes, that craw craw, which in Latin, CRAS, literally means hope or tomorrow. So what you've got is there are layers within the painting. People seeing the crow might initially think that it was something quite sinister, but when you unpack it and when you tie it in with the graffiti on the wall, it takes on a completely new meaning. The dog was intended there as for fidelity, and as I say, you've got different generations within it. And these are all elements in my painting which I've explored as I've gone on. But in the Rowan, it was the very first time I used graffiti. And it was probably the very first time that I used an animal or a bird with a symbolic element, with that intention.
So the Rowan was basically a painting about hope, which is why I liked it so much. But another theme of your earlier work was religious themes. I mean, your famous canvas of St John Ogilvie, for example. How much a factor was your own personal religion in that expression of your art?
I think I'm always drawn to stories. I was brought up a Catholic, a very religious boy, and right up to my as a young adult, I would have defined myself as a religious person. My religious beliefs have changed. Faith's a journey, and at this point in the journey, I can no longer hold to the things that I believed when I was a younger man, and that's probably the best I can say. The story of John Ogilvie is a difficult one. So I decided to dig back. It was painted to be hung in a primary school, to the point where a young man, a boy, makes quite a difficult decision. And that's what I chose to depict, was that point at which he made the decision to become a religious person, which then went on to shape the rest of his life.
But many of your religious paintings, you present religious figures, historical figures, in a modern setting. So that was a deliberate choice as well. And figures would be recognisable from biblical stories or from John Ogilvie as a Catholic martyr in Scotland. They are presented in modern day as if ordinary people. I'm fascinated by that aspect. And that, obviously, a deliberate choice of yours. And contrasting, for example, with another great Scottish artist, Peter Howson, who presents his religious figures very much with, back in the realism of the day. But you present them in modern settings. What was your thinking behind that?
You change the context, you change how the story is received. There are a number of paintings on the theme of the deposition, Christ being taken down from the cross. And I've had some quite seriously negative reactions to these things because it's almost, in some respects, regarded as a slightly blasphemous. How can you depict Christ with jeans? I mean, you think about the story, I mean, you put flowing robes and a beard on these people, and it becomes almost romantic, Christ being taken down from the cross, being taken to the tomb. But you set that same story in the streets of Glasgow, and you've got three of his mates basically who've managed to get a hold of the body, and they're huckling it through the streets of Glasgow. That changes the narrative profoundly. It strips away any notion of romance, and what you're left with is the brutality.
Now, Gerard, you're known as an outstanding portrait artist, and one of your striking exhibitions was in the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow in 2014, where you had 14 portraits of various personalities, 14 for 14, as it were. I mean, I was lucky enough to be in that exhibition, but I was also interested by the settings you gave some people. I mean, can you tell us a bit about that? Neil Lennon, the Celtic manager. You got some of the background and some of the spirit of Lennon into that picture. And of course, I've heard you're a Celtic supporter yourself, so it wouldn't be a great hardship painting the Celtic manager.
Neil's a complex character, and in fact, possibly of all of the paintings I've made, that still remains one of the most controversial. You have this man standing straight to camera, but surrounded by this maelstrom of graffiti, which adds, once you understand all the various layers, and probably Neil himself is the only one who could really unpick it because there's lots of personal stuff in there. Once you understand all of those layers, you get some better sense of the man himself. And
one of your more recent, very famous portraits of another sporting hero in Scotland, Doddy Weir, which has caused something of a sensation, where Doddy's own personal battles have been featured on this programme, but he's very, very much an iconic figure in Scotland. Tell us about that painting.
Gosh, that's just the most wonderful. Actually, I'm getting tingles even thinking about it. Opportunities present themselves. It's a slightly convoluted story, but basically I offered to make a painting of Doddy to help to raise funds for his foundation. I think Doddy was a bit nervous about the idea initially, although that confidence that he radiates, it won't maybe surprise you to know that there's a bit of a front there. So I think he was quite nervous about it. Went down to meet him, and the idea was that we would take the painting. There was a big fundraising event in Hong Kong, and my idea was that if we make this painting and we get it right, we'll crowdfund it. We'll crowdfund it in Hong Kong, and basically we'll try and raise some money. So I went to meet Doddy, and he had really no idea of what are we doing, what does the portrait entail. So I had to kind of lead him. What I got was this amazing series of images of this incredible man, straight to camera, and you can see in the portrait, you can see the pain, I think, in his eyes, and you can see a bit of fear, but more than anything, because of the pose, you can see his stoicism, basically. The shoulders back with that gorgeous, soft borders landscape. I think it's one of the strongest paintings I've ever made, and I'm going to allow myself to be a wee bit romantic here. I think we did that for the right reason. We raised a fortune. I think we raised £150,000, I think, through the painting.
And of course, Doddy's battle with MND has captured the hearts of the nation and the rugby world internationally, and good luck to him. latest theme I've noticed in your work is about ballet, which is quite a surprising departure for some amazing behind-the-scenes portraits. What's behind this latest theme of your work?
I've been working with dancers for years, unofficially. Ballet dancers in particular are the most amazing creatures. If you want to feel bad about yourself, about your, how you look and everything else, go and stand beside a few ballet dancers. They are just remarkable. I got to go backstage for a rehearsal of a ballet called The Fairy's Kiss, thinking, well, I'll go and see, I might get something, and it just absolutely blew me away. And what I discovered, to my amazement, is I'm not really interested in the dancing. What I'm interested in is that moment before. The layers, that slightly voyeuristic, looking from backstage, and in most cases beyond a dancer who's just about to go on and perform. And actually, we did something on Radio Scotland, Chris Hampson, myself, where we spoke about the paintings and fascinating different perspectives. He spoke about that. He got that completely. He spoke about that performance space. He talked about the brutality of that performance space, the white hot heat of that performance space. For us, it's full of magic and it's full of grace, but for a dancer, it's brutal.
Gerard Burns, you've achieved glittering success now in your career. Your portraits, your paintings are in the galleries, the national galleries in Scotland. But let me take you back to St Aloysius when you were a teacher. Now, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that one of the boys or girls came along and said, please, sir, I'm thinking about becoming an artist. What would you say to that youngster now?
What's the old joke? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. Practice, practice, practice.
Gerard Burns, one of Scotland's greatest artists, thank you so much for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
My pleasure.
Rather than a conventional close today, we thought we would end this special show on Scotland with a third degree of Burns. Gerard's son, recording artist Ryan Joseph Burns, now plays us out with what some people consider to be the most beautiful love song ever written, Robert Burns's Hey Fond Kiss.
Star